The cobblestones of Thornwick's market square had grown familiar beneath Prince Lysander's weathered hands. 3 centuries of feeling his way along these same stones, listening to the same morning bustle, breathing in the same mixture of bread, horse dung, and human sweat. The irony wasn't lost on him. A vampire prince reduced to begging for scraps, his once commanding presence now hunched and forgotten in the shadows of merchant stalls. His mother's curse had been thorough. Not only had she stripped him of his sight, but she'd bound his vampiric powers so tightly that he could barely sense the blood flowing through nearby veins. The only mercy she'd allowed was his connection to the bats. Through their eyes, he could see fragments of the world, though he dared not reveal this gift. "Here you are again, old man." The voice belonged to Elara Whitmore, though he'd learned her name only by listening to others address her. For 6 months now she'd appeared every morning at dawn, pressing warm bread into his palm with a gentleness that made his dead heart ache. Through the eyes of the bats roosting in the cathedral's bell tower, he'd watched her, auburn hair catching the early light, green eyes bright with determination as she distributed food to the city's forgotten. "Thank you, miss," he whispered, his voice deliberately hoarse and broken. The bread was still warm from her family's ovens, and he could smell the rosemary she'd kneaded into the dough. "You're welcome." She lingered, as she always did. "The mornings are getting colder. Do you have somewhere warm to sleep?" Lysander's fingers tightened around the bread. In his former life, he'd commanded armies, ruled over vast territories, inspired both fear and devotion in equal measure. Now, a baker's daughter showed him more kindness than he'd received in 300 years. "I manage," he said simply. Through his bat's vision, he watched her frown, noting the way she worried her lower lip, a habit he'd observed countless times. She was perhaps 25, with calloused hands that spoke of hard work, and a spine that never quite bent no matter how heavy her burdens. "My name is Elara," she said suddenly. "I've been bringing you bread for months, and I don't even know what to call you." The question hung in the air like morning mist. He couldn't give her his real name. Prince Lysander Dracul had been declared dead centuries ago, but neither could he continue this charade of anonymity with the one person who'd shown him genuine compassion. "Marcus," he said finally, choosing the name of a long-dead friend. "My name is Marcus." "Well, Marcus," Elara's voice carried a smile he could hear. "It's nice to properly meet you." As her footsteps faded into the growing crowd, Lysander allowed himself a moment of dangerous hope. For the first time in 3 centuries, he looked forward to tomorrow's dawn. But hope, he'd learned, was often the cruelest gift of all. The cathedral bells chimed 7 times as Elara made her way through the market square, her basket lighter with each stop. She'd been awake since before dawn, helping her father knead the day's bread. But these morning rounds energized her in ways that surprised even herself. It had started as penance, really. Father Benedict had suggested charitable works after she'd confessed her growing restlessness, her desire for something beyond the endless cycle of flower and fire that defined her days. But somewhere along the way, duty had transformed into genuine care, especially for the blind beggar who sat in the shadow of the old fountain. There was something different about Marcus. The other beggars called out to passers-by, pleaded with dramatic flourishes, or told elaborate tales of woe. Marcus simply sat in silence, accepting what was given with quiet dignity. His clothes, though patched and faded, had once been fine. His hands, despite their calluses, moved with an odd grace, and his voice, when he spoke, carried traces of an education that didn't match his circumstances. "Elara," her friend Meredith's voice cut through her thoughts. "You're wool-gathering again." "Sorry." Elara turned to find Meredith approaching with her own basket, though hers contained herbs from her mother's garden rather than bread. "I was just thinking. About the mysterious beggar, I'd wager." Meredith's eyes sparkled with mischief. "You've been distracted ever since you started this charitable crusade of yours." "It's not a crusade," Elara protested, though her cheeks warmed. "And I'm not distracted." "Of course not. That's why you just tried to give Mrs. Hartwell's cat a loaf of bread instead of her." Elara glanced down to find the tabby cat looking up at her with obvious confusion, a small loaf balanced on its head. She quickly corrected her mistake, earning a laugh from Meredith and a reproachful look from Mrs. Hartwell. "There's something about him," Elara admitted as they walked toward the next stop. "Something that doesn't quite fit. Maybe he's a fallen nobleman," Meredith suggested dramatically. Cast out by his family for some terrible scandal. Or maybe he's just a man who's had bad luck, Elara replied, though she couldn't shake the feeling that Meredith's wild guess might be closer to the truth than either of them realized. As they rounded the corner near the fountain, Elara's steps slowed. Marcus sat in his usual spot, but something was wrong. His head was tilted at an odd angle, as if he were listening to something she couldn't hear. His hands, usually relaxed in his lap, were clenched into fists. "Marcus?" She approached cautiously. "Are you all right?" His head snapped toward her voice, and for just a moment, she could have sworn his sightless eyes focused directly on her face. But that was impossible, wasn't it? "Miss Elara," his voice was tighter than usual. "You should go home today. Take your friend with you." "What? Why?" She knelt beside him, close enough to catch a scent that didn't belong, something wild and dangerous, like a storm approaching. "What's wrong?" "Strangers came to town last night," he said quietly. "The kind of strangers who bring trouble with them." Meredith stepped closer, her earlier playfulness forgotten. "What kind of strangers?" Marcus's jaw worked silently for a moment, as if weighing his words. "The kind who hunt things that shouldn't exist." A chill ran down Elara's spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Marcus, you're frightening me." "Good," he said simply. "Fear will keep you alive." Before she could ask what he meant, the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the square. 3 riders approached, their black horses snorting steam in the cool air. The men wore dark traveling cloaks, but Elara caught glimpses of silver crosses and wooden stakes at their belts. Vampire hunters. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She'd heard stories, of course. Tales of the undead that walked among the living, feeding on blood and corrupting souls. But those were just stories, weren't they? Frightening tales told around winter fires to make children behave. "Stay calm," Marcus whispered, his hand somehow finding hers in the folds of her skirt. His touch was cold, she noticed, distantly, cold as winter stone. "Don't look at them directly. Don't give them any reason to notice you." The hunters dismounted near the fountain. Their leader, a tall man with silver-streaked hair and predatory eyes, scanning the crowd with practiced efficiency. When his gaze passed over Marcus, it lingered for just a moment before moving on. "We're looking for information," the leader announced, his voice carrying easily across the square. "About creatures of the night, vampires, anyone who's seen strange things, unexplained deaths, people acting oddly. There's gold for useful information." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Gold was a powerful motivator in a town like Thornwick where most people struggled to put food on their tables. "There ain't been no strange deaths," called out Tom the blacksmith. "Least none stranger than usual." "What about odd behavior?" pressed one of the other hunters. "People avoiding sunlight, showing unusual strength, healing too quickly from injuries." Elara's breath caught. Marcus's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around hers, and she realized with growing certainty that her instincts had been right. There was indeed something different about him, something that would interest these hunters very much. "Nobody like that here," she heard herself saying, her voice carrying clearly across the square. "We're just simple folk trying to make an honest living." The lead hunter's eyes fixed on her, and she forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. "And you are?" "Elara Whitmore. My family runs the bakery on Merchant Street." "Ah, yes, I can smell the bread on you." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Tell me, Miss Whitmore, have you noticed anything unusual about any of your customers? Anyone who seems different?" The weight of Marcus's hand in hers felt like an anchor. She thought of 6 months of shared mornings, of quiet conversations and small kindnesses. She thought of the way he sometimes seemed to know things he shouldn't be able to see, the way his voice carried hints of nobility, the way he'd just warned her about danger before these hunters had even appeared. "No," she said firmly. "Nothing unusual at all." The hunter studied her for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "Very well. But keep your eyes open, Miss Whitmore. The creature we're hunting is dangerous beyond your imagination. It's been hiding in this region for decades, possibly centuries. When we find it, and we will find it, anyone who's helped it will share its fate." As the hunters remounted and rode toward the inn, Elara felt Marcus's hand slip away from hers. When she looked down at him, his face was a mask of careful neutrality, but she could see the tension in every line of his body. "Marcus," she whispered, "You should go," he said without looking up, "and you shouldn't come back." "Why?" "Because," he said quietly, "some secrets are too dangerous to keep." But as Elara walked away, her mind racing with questions and possibilities, she knew she couldn't stay away. Whatever Marcus was hiding, whatever danger he represented, she was already too involved to simply walk away. The hunters had come to Thornwick looking for a monster. She was beginning to suspect they'd found one. But monsters, she was learning, weren't always what they seemed. That evening, as darkness settled over Thornwick like a familiar blanket, Lysander made his way through the narrow alleys behind the market square. His connection to the bats was stronger at night, their nocturnal hunting providing him with a network of eyes throughout the city. Through them, he'd tracked the hunters to the Prancing Pony Inn, where they'd taken rooms and begun questioning locals with increasing intensity. They were getting closer. 3 centuries of hiding had taught him patience, but it had also taught him to recognize when it was time to run. He should have left Thornwick the moment he'd sensed their approach, should have disappeared into the night as he'd done dozens of times before, leaving no trace of his presence. But he couldn't stop thinking about Elara's hand in his, warm and steady and trusting, the way she'd lied to protect him without even knowing what she was protecting. The quiet strength in her voice as she'd faced down trained killers with nothing but conviction and courage. She deserved better than to be abandoned without explanation. The Whitmore Bakery sat on a corner of Merchant Street, its windows glowing with warm lamplight. Through his bat's eyes he could see Elara inside, cleaning flour from the wooden tables while her father counted the day's earnings. She moved with efficient grace, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing toward the windows as if expecting trouble. He waited until her father retired upstairs, then tapped gently on the back door. "We're closed," came her voice muffled by the thick wood. "It's Marcus." A long pause, then the sound of a bar being lifted. The door opened just wide enough for her to peer out, and he saw her eyes widen as she took in his appearance. Gone was the hunched, shuffling beggar. He stood straight now, his shoulders back, and though he still wore the same patched clothes, something fundamental had changed in his bearing. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew there was something different about you. May I come in? We need to talk." She hesitated for only a moment before stepping aside. The bakery's interior was warm and inviting, filled with the lingering sense of bread and cinnamon. Lysander had to resist the urge to breathe deeply. Human food held no appeal for him, but the comfort it represented was almost overwhelming. "You can see," Elara said. It wasn't a question. "Not in the way you think." He turned to face her, noting how she stood with her back to the wall, ready to run if necessary. "Smart girl. But yes, I'm not truly blind." "Then why pretend? Why spend months begging in the square when you could?" She stopped, her eyes narrowing. "The hunters. They're looking for you, aren't they?" There was no point in denying it. "Yes. What are you?" The question hung between them like a blade. He could lie, could craft some story about being a fugitive noble or a spy in hiding. But she'd already risked herself to protect him, and she deserved the truth. "I'm a vampire," he said simply. To her credit, she didn't scream or faint or reach for a cross. She simply stared at him for a long moment, then sank into one of the chairs beside the work table. "A vampire," she repeated slowly, "like in the stories. Some of the stories are true. Others are nonsense designed to make humans feel safer." He remained standing, ready to leave if she asked him to. "I don't kill innocents, if that's what you're wondering. I haven't fed on human blood in over 2 centuries. Then how do you survive? Animals, mostly. It's not pleasant, but it sustains me." He watched her face carefully, looking for signs of revulsion or fear. Instead, he saw curiosity, and something that might have been compassion. "I know what you're thinking. Why should you believe me? Why should you trust the word of a monster?" "Are you a monster?" she asked quietly. The question caught him off guard. Yes. By definition, I suppose I am." "That's not what I asked." She leaned forward, her green eyes intense. "I've watched you for months, Marcus, or whatever your real name is. I've seen how you interact with the other beggars, how you share what little you have, how you never take more than you need. Monsters don't do that." "My name is Lysander," he said, the truth feeling strange on his tongue after so long. "And you don't know what I've done in the past." "No, I don't. But I know what you've done recently, and that matters more to me than ancient history." She stood, moving closer despite the danger he represented. "Why are they hunting you? What did you do?" "I was born," he said bitterly. "Born to the wrong family, with the wrong bloodline. My mother cursed me for betraying our clan, stripped me of most of my powers, and cast me out. The hunters have been tracking me ever since, believing I'm some great threat to humanity." "Are you?" "Not anymore. The curse saw to that." He gestured to his shabby clothes, his diminished state. "I'm barely more than human now, except for the inconvenient matter of immortality and a diet that would horrify most people." Elara was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he'd told her. When she spoke again, her voice was steady. "What will you do now? Will you run?" "I should. It's what I've always done before." "But—" He met her eyes, allowing her to see the conflict there. "But I find myself reluctant to leave. Because of me. Because of you." The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. Lysander had lived for over 500 years, had known countless humans, had even loved a few, but none of them had ever made him want to stay in one place, to risk exposure, to choose connection over safety. "The hunters will find you eventually," Elara said. "They seemed very determined." "They are. My clan wants me dead, and they've convinced the church that I'm a threat to humanity. There's a substantial bounty on my head. Then we need to find a way to throw them off your trail." The casual use of "we" made his dead heart skip. "Elara, you can't get involved in this. It's too dangerous." "I'm already involved." She moved to the window, peering out at the dark street. "They saw me talking to you today. If they discover what you are, they'll assume I was helping you all along." The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. By revealing himself to her, by allowing her to get close, he'd already put her in danger. The hunters wouldn't distinguish between willing accomplices and innocent bystanders. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should never have—" "Stop." She turned back to him, her jaw set with determination. "I made my own choices, and I'm making another one now. Which is, I'm going to help you. Elara, no arguments." She moved to a cabinet and began pulling out supplies: bread, cheese, a skin of wine. "You'll need food for the road, and I know places you can hide outside the city. My cousin has a cottage in the woods where—" "I'm not running." His words stopped her mid-motion. "What?" "I said I'm not running. Not this time. But you just said they'll kill you if they find you." "They'll try." He straightened to his full height, and for a moment, she caught a glimpse of the prince he'd once been. "I've been running for 3 centuries, Elara. Hiding, cowering, accepting scraps and insults because I was afraid to fight back. But I'm tired of being afraid. That's very noble, but it's also suicide. Perhaps. But if I'm going to die, I'd rather it be while protecting something worth protecting." She stared at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You mean me." "I mean you." The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities and dangerous hopes. Finally, Elara set down the supplies she'd been gathering and moved closer to him. "There might be another way," she said slowly. "A way that doesn't involve you dying heroically or running away like a coward." "I'm listening." "The hunters are looking for a vampire prince, right? Someone powerful and dangerous?" "Yes. But you're not that person anymore. You're Marcus the Beggar, weak and harmless and beneath their notice." Her eyes brightened with the beginnings of a plan. "What if we made sure that's all they ever saw?" Lysander frowned, not following her logic. "I don't understand. They're expecting to find a monster hiding among us. But what if the monster was hiding in plain sight? What if Marcus the Beggar was exactly what he appeared to be? Just another broken man trying to survive? You're suggesting I continue the charade? I'm suggesting we give them what they expect to find. A dead end, a false trail." She began pacing, her mind clearly racing. If they're convinced there's no vampire in Thornwick, they'll move on to the next town. And how exactly do we convince them of that? Elara's smile was sharp and determined. "Leave that to me." The next morning brought rain, a cold, steady drizzle that turned the market square into a maze of puddles and made everyone hurry about their business with hunched shoulders and lowered heads. Perfect weather for secrets and deception. Elara had spent most of the night planning, and now she moved through the square with purpose, her basket of bread providing the perfect excuse to approach various townspeople. But instead of her usual charitable rounds, she was spreading something far more valuable than food: information. "Did you hear?" she whispered to Mrs. Hartwell as she handed over a loaf of brown bread. About the vampire hunters? The older woman's eyes widened with delicious fear. What about them? They think there might be one here, in Thornwick. Elara glanced around conspiratorially. But I heard from my cousin in Millhaven that they've been tracking something there too. Strange deaths, people found drained of blood. Millhaven? Mrs. Hartwell clutched the bread to her chest. But that's only 2 days' ride from here. Exactly. Which means if there really is a vampire in this area, it's probably not here at all. It's probably in Millhaven, and the hunters are just being thorough by checking all the nearby towns. The seed planted, Elara moved on to her next target. By the time she reached the fountain, where Lysander sat in his usual spot, she'd spoken to a dozen people, each conversation carefully crafted to support the same narrative. Any vampire in the area was likely in Millhaven, not Thornwick. "Good morning, Marcus," she said, kneeling beside him with her usual offering of bread. "Miss Elara." His voice carried the proper note of humble gratitude, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "You're kind to remember an old beggar." "Nonsense. We all have to look out for each other, especially with these hunters in town." She lowered her voice as if sharing a confidence. "Though between you and me, I don't think they'll find what they're looking for here." "Oh?" "My cousin sent word from Millhaven. There have been strange deaths there. People found with their throats torn, drained of blood. If there really is a vampire in this area, that's where it is." She saw his slight nod of understanding. The story was spreading, just as she'd planned. By noon, half the town would be whispering about the vampire of Millhaven, and by evening, the hunters would be hearing those whispers from multiple sources. "You're very clever," Lysander murmured, so quietly that only she could hear. "I have my moments." As she rose to continue her rounds, she noticed one of the hunters approaching from across the square, the younger one, with dark hair and suspicious eyes. She made sure to look appropriately startled when he called out to her. "Miss Whitmore, isn't it?" "Yes, sir." She bobbed a small curtsy, playing the part of a simple baker's daughter. "How may I help you?" "I was wondering if you'd heard anything new since yesterday. Any talk among the townspeople about unusual occurrences?" Elara bit her lip as if debating whether to share gossip. "Well, there has been some talk." The hunter leaned forward eagerly. "What kind of talk?" "About Millhaven. My cousin lives there, and she sent word yesterday about some terrible deaths. People found with their throats torn, blood drained from their bodies." She shuddered convincingly. "The local priest thinks it might be the work of a demon." "Millhaven?" The hunter's eyes sharpened with interest. "How far is that from here?" 2 days hard riding to the north. It's a larger town than Thornwick, with more places for something evil to hide." The hunter nodded slowly, clearly processing this information. "Has your cousin mentioned anything else? Any other strange occurrences?" "Livestock found dead in the fields, drained of blood. People reporting strange dreams, feeling watched in the night." Elara was improvising now, drawing on every vampire story she'd ever heard. "The town guard has started patrolling in groups, afraid to go out alone after dark." "Interesting." The hunter glanced around the square, his gaze passing over Lysander without interest. "And here in Thornwick? Nothing unusual at all?" "Nothing, sir. We're a quiet town. The most exciting thing that's happened recently was when Tom the blacksmith's horse got loose and ran through the market, knocking over half the vegetable stalls." The hunter actually smiled at that. "Well, thank you for the information, Miss Whitmore. You've been very helpful." As he walked away, Elara allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. The hook was set. Now she just had to wait for the hunters to take the bait. She continued her rounds, reinforcing the story with each person she spoke to, adding small details that made it seem more real. By the time she finished, the tale of the Millhaven vampire was spreading through Thornwick like wildfire. When she returned to the fountain for one final check on Lysander, she found him exactly as she'd left him, a broken old beggar, beneath notice and suspicion. But when she knelt to press another piece of bread into his hands, he caught her fingers briefly. "Thank you," he whispered. "Don't thank me yet," she murmured back. "This is just the beginning." As if summoned by her words, the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the square. The 3 hunters rode toward the inn, their leader's face grim with purpose. Elara held her breath as they passed, but none of them so much as glanced in her direction. An hour later, word spread through the town. The hunters were leaving for Millhaven at first light. The plan had worked. But as Elara walked home through the gathering dusk, she couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were far from over. She'd bought them time, Nothing more. And time, she was beginning to realize, was a luxury that people like her and Lysander could never take for granted. Still, for tonight at least, they were safe. And sometimes that was enough. The hunters left Thornwick as the morning mist was lifting from the cobblestones, their horses' hooves ringing against the stones as they rode north toward Millhaven. Lysander watched them go through the eyes of a barn owl perched on the cathedral's bell tower, not daring to believe it was real until they disappeared completely from sight. For the first time in 3 centuries, someone had protected him. The realization was both humbling and terrifying. He'd spent so long believing himself beyond redemption, beyond the possibility of human connection, that Elara's fierce loyalty had caught him completely off guard. She'd risked everything to save him, her reputation, her safety, possibly her life, and she'd done it without hesitation. He owed her more than he could ever repay. But debt wasn't the only emotion stirring in his chest as he made his way through the pre-dawn streets toward the bakery. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something that might have been hope. The back door opened before he could knock, and Elara appeared in the doorway, flour dusting her apron and a smile lighting her face. "I saw them leave," she said simply. "Your plan worked perfectly. For now." She stepped aside to let him enter, and he noticed she'd prepared a simple meal: bread, cheese, and wine. Human food that he couldn't properly digest, but the gesture touched him nonetheless. They'll figure out eventually that there's no vampire in Millhaven. Eventually, yes, but by then the trail will be cold. They'll assume I've moved on to another region entirely. Elara poured wine into 2 cups, offering him one even though they both knew he couldn't truly enjoy it. "So what happens now? Do you stay in Thornwick? Keep pretending to be Marcus the Beggar?" The question he'd been dreading. "I don't know. You could, you know. Stay, I mean." She sat across from him at the small table, her hands wrapped around her cup. The disguise worked perfectly. Even when they were looking right at you, they saw exactly what you wanted them to see. "And what about you?" he asked quietly. "What do you see when you look at me?" She was quiet for a long moment, studying his face in the lamplight. "I see someone who's been hurt, someone who's been alone for far too long, someone who's forgotten what it feels like to be cared for." The words hit him like physical blows. "Elara, I also see someone who's been lying to himself about what he wants. And what do I want? The same thing everyone wants: to belong somewhere, to matter to someone, to have a reason to stay in one place instead of always running." She was right, and they both knew it. But wanting something and being able to have it were 2 very different things. "I'm dangerous," he said finally. "Not just because of what I am, but because of who's hunting me. My mother won't give up. Neither will the church. Eventually, they'll find me again, and when they do, we'll deal with it when it happens." "We?" "Yes, we." She reached across the table and took his hand, her warmth seeping into his cold skin. "I'm not going anywhere, Lysander. And neither are you, if I have anything to say about it." The use of his real name sent a shock through him. "You can't know what you're saying. You can't understand what you'd be giving up. A life of safety, of predictability, of needing bread and counting coins and pretending that this is enough." She shook her head. "I've been sleepwalking through my existence, Lysander. For the first time in years, I feel truly awake. Because of danger, because of you." The admission hung between them, heavy with possibility and peril. Lysander had lived for over 500 years, had experienced every emotion the human heart was capable of, but nothing had prepared him for this moment, for the way Elara looked at him, not with fear or revulsion or even pity, but with something that might have been love. "You don't know what you're saying," he whispered. "Don't I?" She stood, moving around the table until she was close enough to touch his face. Her fingers traced the sharp line of his cheekbone, the hollow beneath his eye. "I know you're not human. I know you've done things you regret. I know there are people who want to kill you. And I know that none of that matters to me as much as the fact that you're here, now, and you're real. Elara, I also know that you care about me. I can see it in the way you look at me, hear it in your voice when you say my name. You're terrified of hurting me, but you're even more terrified of leaving me." She was right on all counts, and the truth of it was overwhelming. "I am terrified," he admitted. "I've never had anything to lose before. Not really. And now you do. Now I do." She leaned closer, and he could smell the scent of her skin, warm and alive and utterly intoxicating. So what are you going to do about it? The question that would define the rest of his existence. He could run, as he always had, disappear into the night and leave her with nothing but memories and questions. It would be safer for both of them. Or he could stay. He could choose love over safety, connection over solitude, hope over despair. I'm going to stay, he said quietly, for as long as you'll have me. Her smile was radiant. That might be a very long time. I'm counting on it. When she kissed him, it was soft and sweet and tasted of possibilities he'd never dared to imagine. For the first time in 3 centuries, Lysander allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he deserved happiness. But happiness, he would soon learn, was something that had to be fought for, and the fight was just beginning. 3 weeks passed in a haze of stolen moments and careful deceptions. To the rest of Thornwick, nothing had changed. Elara continued her charitable rounds, distributing bread to the poor and tending to the needy, while Marcus the beggar remained a fixture by the fountain, grateful for scraps and invisible to most passers-by. But in the quiet hours before dawn and after dusk, when the streets were empty and the world belonged to shadows, Lysander and Elara discovered each other. She taught him what it meant to be human again, the simple pleasure of shared meals, even if he could only pretend to eat, the comfort of conversation that ranged from philosophy to gossip, the joy of laughter that came from genuine affection rather than bitter irony. In return, he showed her glimpses of the world beyond Thornwick's borders, sharing stories of distant lands and forgotten ages, of art and music and literature that existed beyond her small sphere of experience. "Tell me about your life before," she said one evening as they sat in the bakery's warm kitchen, her head resting against his shoulder. "Before the curse, before the exile, what were you like as a prince?" Lysander was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns in her auburn hair. "Arrogant," he said finally. "Entitled. I believed the world existed for my pleasure and convenience. What changed? I fell in love with a human." Elara stiffened slightly in his arms. "Oh, her name was Isabella. She was a merchant's daughter, beautiful and intelligent and completely forbidden to someone of my station." His voice carried the weight of old pain. "Vampire society is built on rigid hierarchies. We don't mix with humans except to feed. We certainly don't fall in love with them. But you did. I did. And when my mother discovered the affair, she was displeased. Is that why she cursed you?" "Partly. But the real betrayal came later, when I tried to protect Isabella from my clan's judgment. I revealed vampire secrets to her, taught her our weaknesses, helped her and her family escape to a place where they'd be safe from retribution." Elara lifted her head to look at him. "You chose her over your own people. I chose love over duty. And in doing so, I broke the most sacred laws of our kind." His smile was bitter. "My mother made sure I understood the consequences. She stripped me of my powers, cursed me to walk among humans as one of their beggars, and set hunters on my trail to ensure I could never find peace." What happened to Isabella? She lived a full, happy life, married a good man, had children, died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73. His voice softened. "I watched over her from a distance, made sure she was always safe. It was the least I could do." "You loved her that much?" "I thought I did. But now," he cupped her face in his hands, marveling at the way she leaned into his touch. "Now I realize what I felt for Isabella was infatuation. The thrill of the forbidden, the excitement of rebellion. This, what I feel for you, this is something else entirely." "What is it?" "It's coming home." The words hung between them like a promise, and when she kissed him this time, it was with a passion that made his dead heart race. For a moment he allowed himself to forget about curses and hunters and the impossibility of their situation. For a moment, there was only Elara, warm and alive, and his. But moments, no matter how perfect, couldn't last forever. The sound of breaking glass shattered the peaceful silence, followed by heavy footsteps and the scrape of steel against leather. Lysander was on his feet instantly, every instinct screaming danger, but it was already too late. The door burst open, and 3 figures in dark cloaks flooded into the bakery. Not the hunters who had left for Millhaven. These were different men, older and more dangerous, with the kind of scars that spoke of battles fought and won. "Prince Lysander Dracul," the leader said, his voice carrying the authority of absolute certainty. "You're a difficult man to find." Lysander stepped protectively in front of Elara, though he knew it was a futile gesture. These weren't human hunters. They were vampire assassins, sent by his mother to finish what the curse had started. "Kieran," he said, recognizing the leader despite the centuries that had passed. "Still doing Mother's dirty work, I see. Someone has to clean up your messes." Kieran's smile revealed fangs that gleamed like ivory daggers. "Did you really think you could hide forever? That we wouldn't eventually track you down? I hoped. Hope is for the weak. And you, dear cousin, have grown very weak indeed." The casual cruelty in Kieran's voice was familiar, a reminder of the world Lysander had left behind. A world where power was the only currency that mattered, where compassion was seen as weakness, and love was a luxury that princes couldn't afford. "What do you want?" Lysander asked, though he already knew the answer. "Your head, obviously. Mother's patience has finally run out." Kieran's gaze shifted to Elara, who stood frozen behind Lysander's protective form. "Though I admit I'm curious about your latest pet. She's prettier than the last one. Leave her out of this." "Oh, but she's already in it, isn't she? The great Prince Lysander reduced to playing house with a baker's daughter. How the mighty have fallen." Rage flared in Lysander's chest, hot and dangerous. "If you touch her, you'll what? Fight me?" Kieran laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "You're barely more than human now, cousin. Your mother made sure of that. You couldn't defeat me at full strength, and you certainly can't defeat me now." The truth of those words was a bitter pill to swallow. The curse had indeed stripped away most of his vampiric abilities, leaving him with little more than enhanced senses and the connection to bats that had helped him survive. Against 3 full-powered vampires, he didn't stand a chance. But that didn't mean he wouldn't try. "Elara," he said quietly, not taking his eyes off Kieran. "There's a back door behind the ovens. When I give the signal, run. I'm not leaving you. You have to." "No." Her voice was steady, despite the terror he could smell on her skin. "We face this together." Kieran's laughter filled the room again. "How touching. True love conquers all, is that it? Tell me, little human, do you know what your beloved prince has done? The lives he's taken? The innocence he's destroyed?" "I know enough," Elara said firmly. "Do you? Do you know about the village of Raven's Hollow? About the night he slaughtered an entire family because they witnessed him feeding?" Lysander's blood turned to ice. "That was 300 years ago. I was different then. Were you? Or are you simply better at hiding your true nature now?" The doubt in Elara's eyes was like a knife to his heart. "Elara, Save your explanations for someone who cares," Kieran interrupted. "We're not here for a reunion. We're here for justice." He moved with inhuman speed, crossing the room in the blink of an eye. Lysander barely had time to react, throwing himself sideways to avoid the silver blade that whistled through the air where his head had been. He crashed into one of the work tables, sending flour and utensils flying. "Run!" he shouted to Elara, but she was already moving, not toward the back door, but toward the fireplace where a poker hung beside the hearth. "Brave little thing," one of the other assassins commented, moving to intercept her. "I'll enjoy breaking her." The threat to Elara unlocked something primal in Lysander's chest. The curse might have weakened him, but it hadn't destroyed him entirely. With a roar of fury, he launched himself at the vampire, threatening the woman he loved. The fight was brutal and brief. 3 against 1, with Lysander handicapped by his reduced abilities. The outcome was never really in doubt, but he fought with the desperation of a man with everything to lose, and for a few precious moments he held his own. It was Elara's scream that distracted him, a sound of pure terror that cut through his battle rage like a blade. He turned to see Kieran holding her against his chest, one arm around her throat and a silver dagger pressed to her jugular. "Enough," Kieran said calmly. "Surrender now, or I open her throat." Lysander froze, his hands still raised in fighting position. "Let her go. This is between us." "Is it? Because from where I stand, it looks like she's very much part of this." The dagger pressed closer to Elara's skin, drawing a thin line of blood. "She's your weakness, cousin. Your fatal flaw. And Mother always taught us to exploit our enemies' weaknesses." "Please," Lysander said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "I'll do whatever you want. Just don't hurt her. There's the broken prince we came to find." Kieran's smile was triumphant. "Begging for the life of a human. How far you've fallen. What do you want?" "Your life, obviously." But I'm feeling generous tonight. I'll make you a deal." Lysander waited, knowing he wouldn't like what came next. "Come with us, willingly. Face Mother's judgment with whatever dignity you have left, and I'll let your little Beggar live. And if I refuse, then I kill her now, slowly, while you watch. And then I kill you anyway." It wasn't really a choice at all. Lysander looked into Elara's eyes, seeing his own despair reflected there, and made the only decision he could. "I'll come." "Lysander, no!" Elara struggled against Kieran's grip. "Don't do this." "I have to." He moved toward them slowly, his hands raised in surrender. "I'm sorry, Elara, for everything. For bringing this danger into your life, for not being strong enough to protect you, for loving me?" She interrupted, her voice fierce despite the blade at her throat. "Don't you dare apologize for that." The words hit him like a physical blow. Even now, facing death and betrayal and the collapse of everything they'd built together, she refused to let him diminish what they'd shared. "I love you too," he said quietly. "More than I ever thought possible." "How romantic," Kieran said dryly. "Now shall we go? Mother is waiting, and she's not known for her patience." As the assassins bound Lysander's hands with silver chains that burned his skin, he caught Elara's eyes one last time. In them he saw not just love and fear, but something else, a determination that made his blood run cold. She was planning something. "Elara," he said urgently, "whatever you're thinking, don't. Promise me you won't do anything foolish." But she was already looking away, her attention focused on something behind Kieran's shoulder. Following her gaze, Lysander saw what had caught her attention, the window above the sink, where a familiar shape perched on the sill. A bat. His bat. Understanding flashed between them like lightning. She knew about his connection to the creatures, had seen him use it before, and now she was counting on it to save them both. "I promise," she said, but her fingers were already moving, reaching for the poker she'd dropped during the fight. What happened next occurred in the space of a heartbeat. Elara grabbed the poker and swung it with all her strength at the oil lamp hanging above the work table. The lamp shattered, sending burning oil across the flour-covered surfaces. In the same instant, Lysander reached out through his connection to the bat, sending it diving toward Kieran's face. Chaos erupted. Kieran cursed and stumbled backward, releasing Elara as he tried to fend off the attacking bat. The other assassins spun toward the sudden flames, momentarily distracted. And in that moment of confusion, Lysander acted. The silver chains burned his wrists as he snapped them through sheer force of will, the metal links parting with a sound like breaking bells. He grabbed Elara's hand and pulled her toward the back door, even as the fire began to spread across the bakery's wooden surfaces. "Stop them!" Kieran roared. But it was too late. They burst through the back door into the alley, Lysander's enhanced senses already mapping their escape route. Behind them, he could hear the assassins giving chase, their inhuman speed allowing them to close the distance rapidly. "This way," he gasped, pulling Elara toward the narrow passage that led to the cathedral. If they could reach consecrated ground, the vampires would be forced to stop. It was one of the few old laws that still held power. But even as they ran, Lysander knew it was hopeless. Elara was only human, and the assassins were gaining ground with every step. They would be caught before they reached safety. Unless... "Elara, listen to me," he said as they rounded a corner. "When we reach the next street, I want you to keep running toward the cathedral. Don't look back, don't stop no matter what you hear. What are you going to do?" "What I should have done 3 centuries ago, fight back. But you said you weren't strong enough." "I'm not, but I'm strong enough to buy you time to escape." She stumbled, nearly falling. "I won't leave you. You have to. One of us needs to survive this, and it's going to be you." "Lysander, I love you," he said fiercely. "Remember that. Whatever happens next, remember that I chose this. I chose you. I chose love." Before she could protest further, he spun around to face their pursuers, placing himself between Elara and the 3 vampires who emerged from the alley like shadows given form. "Run!" he shouted, and this time, she obeyed. As her footsteps faded into the distance, Lysander straightened to his full height and prepared to face his fate. He was outnumbered, outmatched, and almost certainly doomed. But for the first time in 3 centuries, he was fighting for something that mattered. And that, he thought as Kieran's blade flashed toward his heart, made all the difference. The cathedral bells were ringing midnight when Elara finally stopped running. She'd made it to the church steps before collapsing, her lungs burning and her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind her, the glow of flames painted the night sky orange. Her family's bakery, everything they'd worked for, reduced to ash and ember. But the fire was the least of her worries. Lysander was gone. She'd heard the sounds of battle echoing through the narrow streets, the clash of steel, inhuman roars of rage, the sickening sound of violence unleashed. Then, abruptly, silence. A silence that had stretched on for what felt like hours, though it could only have been minutes. He was dead. She knew it with the same certainty that she knew her own name. The vampires had killed him just as they'd promised, and she was alone again. Except she wasn't alone, was she? Not really. Miss Whitmore? The voice belonged to Father Benedict, the elderly priest who'd suggested her charitable work all those months ago. He stood in the cathedral doorway, his face creased with concern and confusion. "Father," she gasped, struggling to her feet. "I need sanctuary." "Of course, child. But what's happened?" "The fire. There's no time to explain. Please, just let me inside." He stepped aside without further questions, and Elara stumbled into the cathedral's vast interior. The space was lit by dozens of candles, their flickering light casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. Under normal circumstances, she might have found it peaceful. Tonight, it felt like a tomb. "Elara," Father Benedict closed the heavy doors behind them, sliding the iron bar into place. "What's going on? Who are you hiding from?" She turned to face him, and he stepped back at whatever he saw in her expression. "Vampires," she said simply. "I beg your pardon?" "Vampires. They came to the bakery tonight. They were looking for someone, and they—" Her voice broke. "They killed him." Father Benedict's face went pale. "Child, you're in shock. Perhaps you should sit down." "I'm not in shock, and I'm not imagining things." Elara moved deeper into the cathedral, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The hunters who were here last week? They were right. There was a vampire in Thornwick, but he wasn't the monster they thought he was. "Elara, his name was Lysander. He'd been living here for months, disguised as a beggar. I was helping him hide." She laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "I fell in love with him, Father, with a vampire. What does that make me?" The priest was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle. "It makes you human, child. Love doesn't always choose wisely. He's dead because of me, because I convinced him to stay, to fight instead of run. If I'd just let him go, then you'd be wondering for the rest of your life what might have been." Father Benedict moved to one of the front pews and sat down heavily. "Tell me about him. This vampire you loved." And so she did. Sitting in the candle-lit cathedral, surrounded by stone saints and stained glass windows, Elara told the story of Marcus the Beggar, who was really Prince Lysander Dracul. She spoke of his gentleness, his guilt over past sins, his desperate desire for redemption. She told Father Benedict about the curse that had stripped away his powers, about the hunters who'd pursued him across centuries, about the choice he'd made to protect her at the cost of his own life. When she finished, the priest was quiet for a long time. "You know," he said finally, "in all my years of service, I've heard many confessions, stories of sin and redemption, of love and loss, of choices that define us, but I've never heard anything quite like this. Do you think I'm mad?" "No, child, I think you're grieving." He stood and moved to the altar, where a large silver cross caught the candlelight. "The church teaches that vampires are abominations, creatures without souls, incapable of love or redemption. But if what you've told me is true, it is true, then perhaps the church is wrong about some things." He turned back to her, his weathered face thoughtful. "Perhaps redemption is possible for anyone willing to seek it, regardless of what they are." Before Elara could respond, a sound echoed through the cathedral, the scrape of claws against stone. She spun toward the source, her heart leaping into her throat, but saw nothing except shadows. "What was that?" Father Benedict whispered. "I don't know." Elara moved toward the sound, her eyes straining to pierce the darkness between the pillars. "Hello? Is someone there?" A shape detached itself from the shadows, small, dark, and familiar. A bat, its wing clearly injured, struggled across the stone floor toward her. "Oh!" she breathed, recognizing the creature immediately. It was Lysander's bat. the one that had helped them escape the bakery, which meant, "He's alive," she whispered, then louder, "He's alive." The bat chittered weakly, and through some instinct she didn't fully understand, Elara knew it was trying to tell her something. She knelt beside the injured creature, extending her hand carefully. "Where is he?" she asked softly. "Where is Lysander?" The bat struggled to lift itself, its dark eyes fixed on hers with unmistakable intelligence. Then, with obvious effort, it began moving toward the cathedral side entrance, the one that led to the old crypts beneath the church. "The crypts," Father Benedict said, understanding immediately. Of course. Consecrated ground. They couldn't follow him there. Elara was already moving, cradling the injured bat gently in her hands. "Father, I need you to open the crypt entrance. Child, if he's badly injured, then we need to help him, please." The priest hesitated for only a moment before nodding. He retrieved a heavy iron key from behind the altar and led her to a small door hidden behind a tapestry. The lock turned with a grinding sound that seemed to echo through the cathedral like thunder. "Be careful," he warned as she started down the narrow stone steps. "The crypts are old, and some of the passages are unstable." But Elara was already descending into darkness, guided by nothing but hope and the weak chittering of the bat in her hands. The crypts were a maze of stone corridors and burial chambers, carved into the bedrock beneath the cathedral centuries ago. The air was cold and still, heavy with the weight of ages and the silence of the dead. Elara's footsteps echoed strangely in the confined space, and more than once she had to stop and listen for any sign of life. It was the bat that found him first, stirring restlessly in her hands as they approached a chamber near the back of the crypt. Elara pushed open the heavy stone door and stepped inside, her heart stopping at what she saw. Lysander lay crumpled against the far wall, his clothes torn and bloody, his face pale as marble in the dim light filtering down from above. For a terrifying moment she thought they were too late, that he was already gone. Then his eyes opened, focusing on her with obvious effort. "Elara?" His voice was barely a whisper. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe. Nowhere is safe anymore." She set the bat gently on a stone ledge and knelt beside him, her hands hovering over his injuries. "How badly are you hurt?" "I'll heal. Eventually." He tried to sit up and immediately fell back with a grimace of pain. "The silver did more damage than I expected." "Silver?" "Their blades were coated with it. It burns us, slows our healing." He managed a weak smile. "But I'm alive, which is more than I expected an hour ago." "What happened? After I ran?" "I fought them, lost obviously, but I managed to wound Kieran badly enough that they had to retreat. They'll be back though, as soon as they've recovered." Elara felt tears stinging her eyes, relief, fear, and overwhelming love all tangled together. "I thought you were dead." "So did I for a while." He reached up with obvious effort to touch her face. "You saved me, you know. The distraction with the fire and the bat, it gave me the opening I needed to break free of the chains. We saved each other." "Yes," he agreed softly. "We did." They sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the weight of stone and history, and the knowledge that their time together might be measured in hours rather than years. "What do we do now?" Elara asked finally. Now we run. As far and as fast as we can." Lysander struggled to sit up again, this time managing to stay upright. "I have contacts in other countries, places where my mother's reach doesn't extend. We could start over, build a new life." "No." The firmness in her voice surprised them both. "No? I'm tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of letting other people dictate how we live our lives." Elara stood, her jaw set with determination. "There has to be another way. Elara, be reasonable. They'll never stop hunting me. And now that you're involved, then we make them stop." Lysander stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. "How exactly do you propose we do that?" "I don't know yet. But there has to be a way to break your mother's curse, to end this cycle of violence and revenge. People don't just get to destroy other people's lives because they're angry about choices made centuries ago. This isn't a fairy tale, love. There's no magical solution that will make everything right. Maybe not. But I refuse to believe that running is our only option." She began pacing the small chamber, her mind racing. "Tell me about the curse. How exactly does it work?" "Elara, humor me, please." Lysander sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of her shoulders. "It's blood magic. Very old. Very powerful. My mother bound it to my life force, made it part of who I am. The only way to break it would be—" He trailed off, his eyes widening with sudden realization. "Would be what?" Elara pressed. "The only way to break it would be for her to release it willingly. Or," he swallowed hard, "or for her to die. Then we kill her." "Elara, you can't be serious." "Why not? She's been trying to kill you for 3 centuries. Turnabout seems fair. She's not just any vampire. She's the vampire queen, one of the most powerful creatures on Earth. Even at full strength, I couldn't defeat her. In my current state, it would be suicide. Then we find a way to restore your strength first." Lysander stared at her, torn between admiration for her courage and terror at her recklessness. "You're talking about declaring war on the most dangerous vampire in existence. I'm talking about fighting for our right to exist, to love each other, to build a life together without constantly looking over our shoulders." She knelt beside him again, taking his hands in hers. "I know it's dangerous. I know the odds are against us, but what's the alternative? Spending the rest of eternity running from shadows? The rest of eternity is a very long time, Elara. You're human. You'll age, you'll die, and I'll be left alone again anyway." The words hung between them like a blade, cutting deep into the heart of their impossible situation. Elara was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was very soft. "Then maybe I don't stay human." Lysander's blood turned to ice. "No, absolutely not. Why not? If we're going to be together, because I won't damn you to this existence, I won't make you into what I am. What if I want to be what you are? You don't understand what you're asking. The hunger, the isolation, the weight of centuries. I understand that I love you, and I understand that I'd rather spend eternity with you than a normal lifetime without you." The declaration hit him like a physical blow. In all his centuries of existence, no one had ever been willing to sacrifice so much for him. The magnitude of her offer was both humbling and terrifying. "Elara, don't say no yet. Just think about it. Please." Before he could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the stone corridor. They both froze, listening as the steps grew closer, accompanied by the soft murmur of voices. "Someone's coming," Elara whispered. Lysander struggled to his feet, positioning himself between her and the chamber entrance despite his injuries. "If it's them, it's not." Father Benedict's voice carried clearly through the stone passages. "Miss Whitmore, are you down there?" Relief flooded through Elara. "We're here, Father." The priest appeared in the doorway moments later, carrying a lantern that cast dancing shadows on the crypt walls. Behind him came an unexpected figure, a woman Elara didn't recognize, elderly but sharp-eyed, dressed in traveling clothes and carrying a leather satchel. "This is Sister Margaret," Father Benedict explained. "She arrived just after you went down to the crypts. She says she has information about your situation." The woman stepped forward, her gaze moving between Elara and Lysander with obvious assessment. "Prince Lysander Dracul, I presume?" Lysander tensed. "Who's asking?" "Someone who's been looking for you for a very long time." Sister Margaret set down her satchel and began rummaging through its contents. "My name is Margaret Blackthorn. I'm a scholar of vampire lore, and I believe I may have a solution to your problem." "What kind of solution?" Elara asked warily. "The kind that doesn't involve running for the rest of your lives." Sister Margaret pulled out an ancient-looking book, its leather binding cracked with age. "Tell me, Prince Lysander, what do you know about the ritual of severance?" Lysander's eyes widened. "That's a myth, a legend. Is it? I've spent 30 years researching vampire magic, and I can assure you that the ritual of severance is very real, difficult, dangerous, and requiring significant sacrifice, but real." "What is it?" Elara demanded. Sister Margaret opened the book, revealing pages covered in symbols and text that seemed to shift and writhe in the lantern light. "It's a way to permanently sever the magical bonds between a vampire and their sire. In your case, it would break your mother's curse completely, restore your full powers, and make you immune to any future magical attacks from her bloodline." "What's the catch?" Lysander asked, because there was always a catch. "The ritual requires 3 components. First, the blood of the cursed vampire. That's you. Second, the willing sacrifice of a pure soul, someone who loves the vampire enough to risk their life for them." Elara's heart began to race. "And the third?" Sister Margaret's expression grew grave. The third component must be taken from the vampire who cast the original curse, a piece of their essence freely given or forcibly taken. You're talking about going after my mother directly. I'm talking about ending this once and for all. Sister Margaret closed the book with a decisive snap. The question is, are you brave enough to try? Lysander looked at Elara, seeing his own desperate hope reflected in her eyes. It was insane, impossible, almost certainly suicidal. It was also their only chance at a real future together. Tell us what we need to do, Elara said firmly, and in the candlelit depths of the cathedral crypt, surrounded by the bones of the long dead and the weight of centuries, they began to plan for war. What an incredible journey Lysander and Elara have taken us on. From a chance encounter in a market square to a desperate plan that could either free them forever or destroy them both. I have to admit, I'm completely invested in whether they can pull off this impossible ritual and finally find their happily ever after. What did you think of Elara's transformation from a simple baker's daughter to someone willing to risk everything for love? And Lysander's evolution from a broken, cursed prince to someone ready to fight for his future? If you enjoyed this epic tale of love, sacrifice, and supernatural romance, please hit that subscribe button. I have so many more incredible stories to share with you. Drop a comment below and let me know. Do you think they should attempt the ritual of severance? Or is it too dangerous? And here's a question that's been haunting me. If you had the chance to become immortal for love, would you take it? Next week, I'll be bringing you another breathtaking romance. Demon King falls for the angel sent to kill him, but she's lost her memory. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.